So let me start by saying that I left Panjim in 1996 to go for the US, and I remember in Panjim at that time there was a big construction boom going on, and one by one, all of the houses in the middle of the city were being demolished. Now, I was a young architect. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't know what I could see very limited things. But the one thing I noticed was that obviously the city has to grow. Old houses have to go down. You cannot preserve a city and expect it to grow. That doesn't make sense. Something has to go down, right? But what was, even as a young architect, I remember, the only frustration I had was the buildings that were coming up in place of the old houses were like 1/20th as bad as what the old houses did for us. Old buildings, simple buildings, they had nothing big about them. But there was something nice. You walked around them, it felt nice. The new buildings that were coming up, for some reason, they didn't feel very nice, as if they were not done very well and fast. And anyway, so that was one issue that began to bother me. The second issue was, I don't know about you all, but my training in architecture taught me that the only thing that mattered was to be different. The heroes we were shown were superstar architects who were creating big, beautiful buildings. And we were only looking at these people because they were being published, they were big names. And so like everybody else, I was engrossed in them and we were trying to emulate them and didn't know what we were doing. But being different and being cool and being hip or being something nice was the big deal. And everywhere around me, this was going on. But again, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was seeing. When I went to the US, I met a couple of people who began to interest me. And they began to interest me because they were people who began to show people like me that although we are taught to look at one building at a time, that is just a programming of the mind. The more you know, the more you see. And the more you see what's wrong with the picture. So my training as an architect only taught me to see one building at a time. Okay, that's a building. And if that's not what I like, that's a horrible building and you're a horrible architect, and that's the end of it. But when I began to see it through their eyes, I began to realize that all the places that I had traveled in the world and I loved so much, Fontainebleau in Goa. I went to go to Fontainebleau and I like it. I go to Venice and I like it. I go to Japan, some old part of Japan, I like it. Almost every part of the world that we had designed before 1945, I used to like. Even if you blindfold me and take me somewhere in the world, and anything that's old, I would like. And then the question was why? And why didn't I like everything I saw that was built after 1950? I liked the buildings that were done after 1950, maybe 1 out of 10. But if you took me to a historic city, all the buildings around a plaza or a square, although I may not pick out one, it just felt nice to be there. So obviously something was wrong. Either something was wrong with me or something was wrong in the way I had been taught. So I began to change the way I thought about architecture through these people and other things. And I began to realize that the missing link in all my education was that architecture is only part of making a city. That architecture is not about making buildings. Buildings is just one thing. Architects can make streets, architects can make plazas, architects can make interiors, architects can make whatever they want to make. This is the beauty of the field. And if you bring it all together, we can make something, an amazing thing that we call a city. Now, why is this important? Because the quality of life that we live depends on our cities. Your health depends on your city. I mean, that is the most important thing I keep saying on all these Zoom conferences I'm called to. If COVID-19 teaches us anything today, it is that our health is so important. All of a sudden we're like, shit, I'm going to catch COVID-19 tomorrow. So your health has been brought back to the forefront of your psychology. But If your air is not fresh, if your cars are everywhere, if you don't have a quality of life, you're stressed out every day, then what are we doing as people? So where I'm going with this is that I'm convinced that architecture has been reduced to an aesthetic profession, which is very sad. So and we have reduced it because we only judge it for aesthetics. You do this, therefore you're great. You know some crazy software and come up with crazy ideas, and therefore you're great. Maybe, but there are no deeper questions that we are asking about. What architecture will do? Can architecture improve health? Can it change our quality of life? Can it give us more oxygen? Can it preserve rivers? Can it heal ecosystems? I mean, we are trying, but so among all these questions, one very important question is, can architecture make something bigger than itself? And, I talk about this a lot in India, and I want to just shatter a few myths here, because there are constant questions. Oh, I feel, Bobby, you're speaking from the US where everything is different. In India, it's not like this. You have to leave us exactly to what we are. I don't think that is true, and here is why. There is a difference between Indian cities and American cities, big difference. The two biggest differences is the colossal amounts of economic disparity in India, which is not there in the US. The amounts of poverty in cities like Bombay, amazing, huge, incomparable. The second one is regulatory stringency. In US, law is everything. In India, law is not everything. I mean, you can fiddle with the law, you can do reinforcement is not very strict, we know all that. But what is common in all cities across the world is that there is a middle part of cities which is not rich and not poor, where development, real estate, developers make 90% of the cities we live in. If you think about Mumbai, if you think about Los Angeles, if you think about Milan, Zhengzhou, any place in the world, 90% of the city, 80%, 70%, whatever it is made by developers. Which means that if you don't know how to make developers behave, your city is finished. It's just fact. So what I'm trying to say here before I get into my presentation is, I am not telling you that I know anything about how to deal with slums. I don't. That is a whole other science that other experts need to take over. I'm also not telling you that I know how to do a great building like Frank Gehry does. He's a genius. If I have an amazing project, I'd much rather give it to Frank Gehry. Tell him to design an opera house. That we require people like that. But in the middle of Frank Gehry and the slum is a big mess. A big mess that architects don't like to talk about. Right? So what is this mess? Freeways, zoning, bylaws, all these kind of things that we think are not part of our domain. And so we criticize them. Bylaws don't matter. You guys don't know what you're doing. The planners don't know what they're doing. So the bottom line is there a way for us to change the rhetoric? Instead of saying you guys are idiots and you don't know what you're doing, I'm the greatest thing in the world, is there a way of turning that around and saying, you know what? Maybe you know something, maybe Siddha knows something, all of us know something. Why don't we come to the table and figure out what is good for the city? So what I'm going to talk about today is one of the success stories we have had in the US. It's a very simple thing we realized about 20 years ago. I was a much younger urban designer and architect at that time. But there were other people who started this, and some of us are carrying this ahead now. But the pioneering ideas came from other people, not us. What they did is they realized that in all cities, there are codes. You call them bylaws. In the US, we call them codes. FAR, coverage. In India, you call it FSI. Every city has this. Every city. There's no city in the world where this doesn't exist. Land use. All of these terms exist. You deal with them every day. You cannot escape them. So the question is, if these laws, they are laws, right? You have to follow them. Unless you follow them, your project will not get stamped. So if that is the law that is written, and that law is giving you the kind of city that you see around you, do you like that city? If you like that city, don't do anything. Leave it alone, enjoy your life. I have nothing to say. If you say to me today, Goa is beautiful, you don't need to do anything. Then there is no reason for this presentation or anything. You can enjoy the rest of your life. But that is not what I hear. I hear all of you frustrated. Are this building is horrible. Pato complex is not good. This building is destroying Goa. No heritage. All these complaints are going on. And if you think about it, all these buildings are legal. They're legal. Think about this. They are not done illegally. You can criticize a slum and say, you guys don't know what you're doing. But an architect has spent so many hours following these codes, fulfilling them, figuring out what to do, and making it. So the bottom line is, what we realized in the US is if you take the law and change the law, if a particular law can give you one kind of city, then changing that law can give you another kind of city. And the choice is really ours, right? So I will say this before we start. Panjim or Mapsa or Madgaon or whatever has three choices. The first choice is you do nothing. You relax, you let life be as it is, and you hope for the best. I'm telling you, in the next 20 years, everything you like about Panjim will be destroyed. I think it's already on its way. But Goa is amazing. Despite all the nonsense, it still looks very nice. But in 20, 30 years, if this continues, it's gone. So the first choice is do nothing. Second choice is go and completely change Goa, like 100%. Come up with some big theoretical idea of some. It's never going to happen. Not practical. So the third choice that Siddha and I talk about a lot is you take 90% of Panjim or Madgaon or whatever, and you say you leave it alone. But you take 10% of the city, 10%, Church Square, some beautiful Azad Maidan. You take these amazing places that are very important, and you change the law in these places. So while the rest of the city can do whatever it wants to do, at least there are 10 or 5 or 6 places in the city. The moment you come into those places, you really have something new and something wonderful. Which means that people, architects, everybody has to behave when they do. Okay, excellent. So what I'm going to do is, I will take you through, something that we have been quite successful in the US, and now we are doing this in Panama. Panama is very similar to Goa. As you know, Central America, it's about 4.5 million people. It was a Spanish colony, has a lot of places like Fontainebleau. So we're trying to do it in small places. We have done it in Australia. We've done it in a couple of places, but we have not yet I haven't gotten the chance of doing this in Asian countries because the rules are different. But I will say that from what I know, this is not some kind of exotic science. I think people in Hyderabad are trying this. Ahmedabad is trying it. There's a lot of good things that people now in India are bringing back, and that's a wonderful thing. So what I will do is I'll talk to you today largely about what we have done in the US. And then what I would love to hear from you guys is, how do you see this applying to India? Because I think it is now up to you guys to take these kinds of things and test it in the markets that you guys have. So the reason I started with this is Fontainebleau, of course, is just to remind you that, writing rules is easy. We all, telling somebody what to do is very easy. We all know how to do that. But before you tell somebody what to do, figuring out why you are telling somebody what to do is even more important, right? So what I always tell people is the regulations, codes, and all those are words. That is not important. What is really important is what kind of city do you want? What is your vision for the city? If you don't have a vision for the city, you will never be able to write a code. So this is like a doctor telling you, I can give you 5 injections and make you healthy. But what is health? What does health really mean? Does health mean that you will live for 100 years? Does health mean that you will live for 60 years, but live so well that you won't fall sick any day? Does health mean, there are many ways of defining it. So what is your vision for the city first? If you have a vision, then you write rules towards that vision. The biggest problem that I see in the way we write rules is we don't have a vision. We are unclear about our vision. Because we don't have a clear vision, we use FSI, coverage, and all these numerical ideas to sort of justify it. And why has this happened? Because the planning profession has been divorced from the architecture profession. There was a time when planning and architecture were one field. They were always one. but we have divorced. So planners don't know anything about aesthetics. Architects don't know anything about cities, and architects only make buildings. Planner only makes codes, and the two don't talk to each other. This is the problem. So here are two landscapes. They could be anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter where they are. But here is the problem. The landscape you see on the top, this one, is a landscape that was created with different kinds of rules. They were both legal, but the rules here were different from the rules here. Now let's try and understand why. The rules here basically said that when you have a plaza, all the buildings around the plaza have to define that plaza. You cannot do any nonsense. You cannot have, this is my building, this is your building. Everybody has to listen and behave as they make a plaza, and then outside that you can do whatever you want. This is a slide that shows you what has happened in our city, right? Because the rules are quiet, they're lax. Every architect comes and does whatever the hell they want, and as a result, you get a place with a bunch of buildings, but there's nothing really going on here. If I put you here, if I put you there, if I put you there, you're not going to feel nice about anything. If I put you there, I think you're going to like this place. So there was a reason why all these colonial places and everything we like, they had a meaning because there were rules and people were made to follow the rules. You know, aesthetic ideas, the width of a street, the color of plaster, the character of buildings was not an accident. This is Santorini, and you might have been there. Santorini was not an accident. When we go there, we hang out, we think it's beautiful, but there were rules. There were rules about how houses had to obey certain things. They had to, if you did a house and I did a house and we were fighting with each other saying mine is better than yours, we would have never got to Santorini. Santorini is not about each building fighting with each other. Santorini is about each building talking to each other. That is how you get a place, right? So this is very interesting when you think about it. So one of the biggest problems with cities, this is where the discussion really begins, and this is Goa. I mean, this is not Goa, but this is happening in Goa. We have something called land use planning. This is very important. Land use planning basically takes the city and divides it into zones. So all of you know this. Residential zone, RM1, RM2, CM1, CM2, right? So what this means is, if you have an R zone, only residential uses are going to be allowed. If you have a C zone, it's only commercial. If you have industrial, it's only industrial. Now, why did this happen? Because in the 1920s and 30s, when there were factories and they were throwing out toxic fumes, you could not live next to the factory. So the law had to be passed to take the residential areas far away from the factory. But this is not 1920s. Many things have changed. Because of land use planning, what has happened is we are now living in cities where your office area is far away. You have to rely on the car. You have a freeway, you have a highway, and there's traffic congestion and all these things. So I want, before we go further, I want you to understand land use planning is a huge problem. It's a big legal problem in our city. The fact that you are not allowed to work where you live, that there is only a residential area, and this is largely residential, and you're not allowed to put office buildings there, is a huge problem. I want you to know that in a place like Japan, I don't know how many of you have been to Japan, it is exactly the opposite. So Tokyo is the densest city on the planet, and one of the most interesting cities on the planet. And the reason it is so interesting is because in Japan, the zoning is the opposite. In Japanese zoning, they never tell you which uses you cannot put. So if you have a plot of land, you can put residential, commercial, everything, you can put it there. The only rules they tell you is in certain areas, you cannot put industrial uses. In certain areas, you cannot put office use. This is very important. So basically, Japanese cities are constantly mixed in use. You can work, you can live, you can do whatever you want. It's very beautiful. So this is why Japan is very pedestrian. People don't have to go far away. And there are trains to connect. So land use planning is a big problem. It's a problem in Bombay, it's a problem in Goa, it's a problem everywhere. The second problem is FSI. The biggest problem is FSI. We all know this, but let's try and understand what it really means. The funny thing we have discovered is FSI has very little relationship with building height, because you can take the same FSI And you can do a 1-story building, a 3-story building, 7-story building. I mean, in theory, this is exactly true, right? I mean, think about it. It's purely mathematical, right? I mean, you can take now. So in order to avoid this, they put another mathematical number called coverage. Coverage means in a certain area, you're only allowed to cover 80% of the plot, 60% of the plot, 50% of the plot. So what happens as a result is different people who are designing adjacent to each other have no rule that talks about how these buildings come together to make something nice. So I'll give you a classic example. If you have 5 plots of land in Goa, let's take Azad Maidan. All of this is a place we know very well. Imagine tomorrow, for some magical reason, that Azad Maidan, all the plots around Azad Maidan were empty. And we had this rule of FSI. FSI is, say, 1. Now, one person can come and design a 1-story building. One person can design a 2-story, 3-story, 4-story. Right? This building right here is right on the street. This building is set back from the street. This building is even more set back from the street. This building is a tower. This building is a mid-rise. This building is a low-rise. What kind of Azad Maidan are you going to get? Right? So, hey Cedric, I didn't know you were joining. That's fantastic. So this is the issue we are facing, right? It is numerical, and because it is numerical, we have a problem. The architects are now free to do whatever they want. But before we come to FSI, there are bigger problems, like Pratima, you implied just now, right? What about open spaces? So where we go with this is, before we write guidelines for building, we have to write guidelines for open spaces. Because if we don't address open spaces, then what are you doing? So what is the problem? We have designed streets that look like this. We have designed neighborhoods that look like this. This is there in India too. This is there in India too. This blank wall building is legal. I mean, I want you to understand the gravity of what I'm saying here. Next time you see a building like this in India, think of the fact that this is legal. This is not illegal. That means somebody has written rules that allow a building to be like this. I don't know how many of you think this is great architecture. I don't, but maybe some of you do. I mean, you know, there might be some crazy architects sitting here who love this kind of blank wall buildings. Imagine every building in the city being like this. Would you like this city? I mean, this is the problem with architects, right? The classic problem with architects. If you put them in a historic setting, they'll design a blank wall building because they want to be different. If you put them in a setting where all the buildings are blank, they'll design a transparent building because they want to be different. So this is a problem. You want to be the perpetual contrarian. That's easy. You can come up with feathers in your head and be different. That's easy. So the question is, this is another problem we see in Goa, where you have, I remember this is in Miramar, where, you know, my parents built a house. This was classic problem. Siddha has been to my house. Cedric has been to my house. I remember that it was a single family neighborhood with classic bungalows, Goan style bungalows. And right next to me was a 3-story apartment. Now that 3-story apartment had nothing to do with the bungalow next to it. There were no porches, there was nothing, there were garages in front. So we begin to walk on the street. The street had 10 beautiful bungalows designed by all of you, beautiful architects. And all of a sudden there's a 3-story building with garages in the front. I mean, that is legal. Now how did it become legal? How can somebody all of a sudden put garages in the front, showing cars, when there's supposed to be porches along the way? So something is wrong with our code. So instead of doing this, how can we change the law to do this? That is the question that we are really asking. Okay? So here is the basic idea. So that the rules anywhere in the world, we have a choice. We can write laws to give us this, or we can write laws to give us this. All right? I want you to understand this. The question is, what do you want to write? Because whatever you write has to be followed. At least let's hope for the best, right? In India, you can dodge it also. I'm saying let's hope for the best. At least let's put something sensible on paper. So how do you ensure that the law that you write will never give you this? That is the challenge I'm putting to all of you. What language will you write in your code or bylaw that absolutely ensures that you never get a street like this, but you get a street like this? All right? What rule will you write in your code that doesn't give you places like that, but gives you a place like this? What rule will you write in your book that doesn't give you this kind of nonsense, where every house is the same as every other house, but gives you places like this? Right? So before we get into the process, let's ask this question. Why do you get places like this? What is it that we do not write in our laws that gives you places like this instead of places? Or another way of asking the question is, what is the problem with our laws that allows this kind of building next to this kind of house, or allows this kind of building? What is it in our law that allows an architect to do this in your face? Identify this. The problem with our laws is not that they tell us to do. I'll say it in a more clear way. Our laws, when it comes to development, tell us what to do, but they do not tell us what not to do. I'll say this again. Our laws in development tell us what to do. Put this setback, 2 cars per line, height limit this much, FSI this much. But they don't tell us what not to do. No blank walls to the street. No parking lot in front. Put the parking lots behind. Use proper materials. Your detailing has to be expected to be this standard. Nothing. Zero. So if you get a good architect, chances are it will be a nice building. But if you don't get a good architect, you're finished. So this is the issue, right? So they trust, they put too much faith in the least common denominator of our profession. And that is a problem. I think the first thing we have discovered is that nothing about changing the law affects profit whatsoever. In fact, if you tell a developer, you're going to reduce your profit by following this law, they're never going to follow this law. You have to tell them they're going to make even more profit. And that is true, because what we have found is, you build a mall like this, you get X amount of people. You build a mall that is designed by Siddha, Harshan, or Cedric, or something very cool, even more people will come. So the question is, we have just fallen into this trap that anything goes, right? That sort of mainstream architecture is a commodity. It builds fast, build it cheap, do some nonsense, you make your money and go. But if the city, if the municipal officials, if the public, whatever, if you just tell him, look, in the US, what we are doing is we call it incentivized planning. So the city says, you know what, instead of doing a building like this, which is cheap, we'll put in $1 million, we'll build a parking garage for you, but you have to follow this rule. And it's a win-win situation, because the developer says, I saved $1 million. Now I'm going to hire a good architect. I'm going to have a nice building, follow your rules. I have not lost anything. The bottom line is nothing to do with profit, because the moment you bring capital into the picture, you're finished. They will never follow the rules, right? So this is a very important question you're asking, Varun, because the danger in bringing all these concepts is the fear that you are changing business as usual. And we are telling you, you're not changing anything. In fact, we're giving you more FSI. We don't even care about FSI. I'm only going to put a height limit. I'll show you that in a minute. We'll just give you a height cap. You can build whatever you want. The only thing we're asking you is respect the street, obey some rules in terms of how you make architecture, create open spaces, make a walkable sidewalk. Forget the style. You can do whatever you want. Siddha may like something, I may like something, you may like something, the audience may like something else. Doesn't matter. That's different. So the point is, this is beyond capital and far beyond aesthetic. The important thing is it is far beyond aesthetic. That is the main thing. So this is FSI. So here is a building. This is an FSI building. Why is it an FSI building? Because it is purely designed as a block. It has no relationship with the street. It doesn't care about what it looks like. It is sitting right next to a beautiful house, but it is designed as a commodity. It is designed by a person who wants to make money, sell it, and get the hell out of it. So again, just to finish this point, the problem with the rules, and Harshan said it beautifully, rules tell us what to do, but they're silent about what not to do. So what we have to do in our codes is take the codes that exist and insert in them some things which tell a person what they should not be doing. That is all we are trying to do. All right? It's as simple as that. Just tell people what they're not supposed to do. Don't smoke a cigarette. You know, don't do this. Don't wear dirty clothes. It's just like we tell our children. Tell them what not to do. So what is the process through which we do this? That is what I want to tell you today. So if I was given a commission, say, you know, Harshan, whoever, we are told to write a series of bylaws for Azad Maidan or Goa or whatever. How do we go about it? At least in the US. I've done it in other countries too. Instead of taking a paper and starting to think of bylaws and what exists, there are two things that are very important. First is, I don't know anything about this place. What do I know? You just invited me to come there. So I have no idea. I'm an outsider. I have some expertise in terms of some experience, but you are the people that know a lot about this place. If I'm doing it in Goa, I don't know anything about Goa today. Siddhan knows about Goa. So the first process is you just do discovery. We call it discovery because I have to discover Goa. I need people like Siddha and others to tell me what is going on, what is the vision. So what we do is we do an analysis. Now this is very simple, right? All of you have done it. This is an analysis which is pretty detailed. It talks about historic buildings. It talks about the form of the city. It documents everything. So this is about 1 or 2 months of work where you just go on a very, you just stay completely humble and you just understand the place really well. You document it, you talk to people, you talk to the city officials, you talk to everybody that you can, citizens, because you don't know. This is the first attitude. I don't know anything, all right? This is very important. The second one is rather than coming back to your office and doing this amazing project that is hidden from everybody and then you're unveiling it in a big way, we have changed this process to what we call a charrette. A charrette is a way where I'll invite Siddha, Harshan, all of you that are in this room. I will say, you know what, just like this, let's have a session. Because everybody has knowledge to share, just like we're doing now. I have a few things. You guys know about Bombay. I don't. Siddha knows about Goa. Cedric knows about Australia. All of us have experiences to teach each other. So why not come together? So we come together in one room for 5 days, 7 days, whatever you want. And this is how we work. All right? So this is city officials. This is people, ordinary people who live in the neighborhoods. Okay, this can be done. This should be done everywhere. I think it's being done in some places. So we start working, and every day we have these presentations on and off, on and off, on and off. And by the time you reach the 5th day, you come up with some idea of what is the beginning. But what is the advantage of doing it this way? By the time you go through 5 days of deliberation, imagine us doing this for 5 continuous days, 12 hours every day. We will either be clear about what our disagreements are. We will be very clear about what our agreements are. We will all be clear about what common vision we want for the city. We will know which people are dissatisfied with that vision. We can find ways of fulfilling their requirements. So bottom line is, you're going to get far closer to a consensus than the traditional way of doing architecture, which is, I am a superstar architect. I'm going to do it in my office. I care a damn about you guys. You guys are idiots. And because you're idiots, after I show you my masterpiece, even if you don't like it, you're idiots because you don't know architecture and I do. Right? This is classic architect talking. The other attitude is, I can do it whichever way you want. Architecture is not for me. It's for you guys. It's for the city. So let's all come together and figure out what this is. I may have some ideas. So the beauty of this is, there's a very important point I'm making here. What we have realized, and this gives me a lot of satisfaction, that after 25 years of being in this field, I finally beginning to understand that the city has nothing to do with the style of architecture. This is the biggest mistake architects make. We think that the whole city has to be designed in one style. Style has nothing to do with architecture. All of us may have different styles. All of us may have different tastes. We may speak different languages. But any place in the world that we love has languages of so many different kinds. But what holds them together is the city. You go around the plaza, it's beautiful. You go around something else, it's beautiful. So when these things are broken, that is when the city fails. So out of this 5-day process comes a very raw drawing like this. This is a raw drawing. It is done by a simple 2 or 3 people sitting on a computer in some room, and it is not even finished. It's a raw model. But what is this model trying to show you? It is showing you in this color all the buildings that exist, and it is showing you in lighter color all the infill, in this case, that we are trying to propose. Now, why is this an important drawing? This is an important drawing because it does a couple of things. It is not architecture. It does not talk about style or anything yet. It talks about where your buildings are taller, where your buildings are less tall, and where your buildings are least tall. This is a vision. It's a vision because this is a single family neighborhood. All the houses here are only 1 and 2 story, 1 and 2 story. To put a 10-story tower sticking in the middle here is ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. Now, if you want to put 10-story towers, and although the buildings here are 3 and 4 stories, you can upzone this area, and you can say the growth of the city should happen here. Let's really pump up the height here. The current height could be only 4 stories, but we want the city to grow. Let's make all the buildings here 10 stories. No problem at all. But if you make this 10-story, let's leave these buildings 2 stories. So you are not changing the amount of accommodation of housing or whatever you're putting in the city. You're telling them, look, if you expect 100,000 people or 500,000 people to come into your city over the next 3-4 years or 10 years or whatever it is, you will accommodate them. That is not a problem. But you cannot do it haphazard, right? Now, this is very, very important what I'm saying. Because if I make this 10 stories, what this immediately means is that this street right here has increased its infrastructure capacity and its traffic capacity right away. And this is the biggest problem with FSI in India. The biggest problem in FSI in India, the way I see it, is we do FSI, but we don't realize that increasing FSI means increasing infrastructure and increasing traffic. So what we do, we up the FSI, but the street is exactly the way it is. So this is a recipe for disaster, right? I mean, so many developments in India. Last time I was in Pune, I saw this Magarpatta and Lavasa and all this stuff. And the answer is very simple, right? The FSI is big, but the area around the town is completely the same. So it is a recipe for disaster. The street width is the same, the sewage is the same. So there is a disconnect between increasing FSI. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I think this is because, you know, in India, in any development that you don't do something called TIS, which you do anywhere else in the world, which is traffic impact study. And this is an authority submission that you do to show the impact on the traffic that your development is doing. I mean, this is one aspect of it, but there's everything else. There's how much of power electrical power you can provide for this development and everything else. But these are authority submissions. So if given to a developer who's developing a property, he would never do this unless he's forced to do.
Cedric,
you're absolutely right. Go ahead, please.
Cedric, here in Bombay, we do these kind of exercises. It is rather compulsory to submit this kind of exercise for the plot, which is more than 20,000 square meter. Traffic analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you do traffic analysis, and then it depends on that. You go to different junctions to change the size of the junctions if you need to, and size of streets.
Yes.
And the developer is responsible to do these changes in the public realm.
No, it doesn't. Actually, we are not allowed to do anything outside our plot. Like, of course, when we do a development, the traffic in that area is. We cannot change anything what is happening in the neighboring roads, because the roads are all BMC roads.
So Pratima, what is important about what you're saying, this is a very important point that both Cedric and you are making. Basically, what you're pointing out is the animosity, the perceived animosity between the public and the private sector, which is not good. Because what is happening is everything you said just now basically implies that you are feeling the weight. You basically feel responsible that, damn it, man, I'm doing whatever I can, but the other side is not doing its job. The only reason we have been able to be successful in the US and maybe a couple of other places is because we have been able to call the authorities and the developers in the same room. This is the whole point I'm trying to make. So there are two ways of doing it. One is what Cedric is saying, where the private entity, the developer says, you know, I want to put higher density here. Give me the FSI. You know, I'm hiring some of the best architects. We'll give you a fantastic product. This will bring you a lot of economic return in the city, and I will pay for it. That is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is you negotiate. For example, there are cities which are desperate to get money. You know, every city is a corporation, right? Every city is a municipal corporation. They want to make money. They have a tax base. So imagine a city that is not doing very well. It's not making enough money because the neighboring cities are cannibalizing on its economy. Now, in such a city, you cannot make the rules very strong, because if you make the rules very strong, no developer is going to come to do development in that city. There's going to be no money. So what these cities can do is they try to put a carrot, you know, to lure developers, to attract developers. So they tell a developer, look, developer, we have some rules. We will build a garage for you. We will give you an approval in 3 months instead of 6 months. All you have to do is come and follow our rules. So there are various ways, various cities, depending on what their circumstances are, create these kind of partnerships. The point Cedric is making is, whatever the case, the public and the private has to talk to each other. This is what you're saying, Cedric. I mean, even in the example you gave, the public sector talked to the private sector and said, look, developer, you have to pay for this. We'll allow you, but you have to pay for it.
Exactly.
So this is very important for India, saying particularly for Goa, because the political connections that many of you have are going to be extremely important here. At the end of the day, every time we have an opportunity to do a project like this, every time we have been successful, the only reason we have been successful is because the mayor and the politicians of the city back it. If you cannot have the political structure back this kind of transformative instrument to change the vision of the city, the architects can do whatever they want, but it's meaningless, because we are powerless in the larger game of cities. We are small players. I always say to my friends, you know, it's like if you're playing the game of chess. Architects are the pawns. You know, I don't know if you play chess. Cedric plays very well, but you know, the pawns. But what we don't realize about a pawn is, if a pawn tries to act too smart, he'll get killed. But if a pawn works with the bishop and the king and the queen, you can make a checkmate in no time. The pawn is very smart. The pawn can do moves that nobody else can do. So if architects learn how to work with, you know, politicians, administrators, mayors, planners, this, that, a lot of good things happen. So instead of thinking of ourselves as some kind of artist sitting in isolation and thinking of how crazy the world is, if we bring everyone to the table, I think it will be much better, particularly in Goa, because there is a lot of interesting political will. There are a lot of people who think about these things. You just need to bring them in one room, and you need to put them on the table with people they know. So the more politicians you know, the better our chances of doing this. This is very, very important. So out of this process, you get a drawing like this. This is a simple drawing, nothing big about this, that basically shows you where the infill, the new development can happen, how the streets can be treated, because you want the public spaces to be very nice, and you have an engineer that tells you what the capacity of the streets can be. That engineer could be from the city, or that engineer could be hired by us. But basically what you're doing is, the architects are doing the design, the engineers are doing the utilities, and the landscape architects are doing the public land. These three things have to be done in the same room in that 1 week. We also have an economic consultant typically on projects like this, who is doing the calculation of how much revenue your real estate is going to be. So that is extremely important. So the more disciplines you have, the better it becomes. Now the question is, all this is good, but how do you make a law out of it? So what we do is, here are all the plots of land, right? You can see there are streets, there are plots. Everything that you see in dark red is the area where the height is the highest, not FSI. I'm not even talking about FSI. FSI is thrown into the garbage. These are the tallest buildings in the city. this is the place where the setback is the least. This is the place where the building can cover almost 100% of the lawn. So in other words, this is the densest part of the city. Because I've already decided along with the people in the community that this street is where they want the density. Why? Maybe because there is a train track there. Maybe because there is a major bus line there. Maybe this connects an important opera house to something else. I don't know. That is all design. But because it's an important connection, you put the density there. Then you have the peach color, which is slightly lower height, slightly bigger setback. Then you have the orange color, which is even less. And then you have the yellow color, which is even this. If you take all this FSI, and now I'm coming into FSI, because if a planner comes, usually they come to our charrettes and they ask me, what is the FSI? So what we do typically is we say, look, you can do an FSI calculation. If you say that the total FSI of this area should be 5, okay, fine. You want the total FSI to be 5, fine, no problem. Here's what I will do. I will make the FSI 10 here, 7 here, 5 here, and 2.5 here. If I take the average FSI of this place, it will still be 5. But there's a big difference in the way you thought of FSI and we thought of FSI. Your FSI was a haphazard FSI with 2.5, 5, 5, 5, 3, 5, which is a chaotic city. That is the city none of us like. And it doesn't work because you have a tall building sitting on a narrow street, there's a traffic jam, the sewage is not working, all this nonsense is happening. What we're doing is we're saying, you have not lost any money. Varun, we have not lost any money. Real estate, no money lost. Your FSI is still 5. But what I have done for your FSI is I've put an FSI of 10 right here. High rise, mid rise, low rise. And accordingly, I have put all my money in this street to make sure this street can support this infrastructure, this building. So FSI is exactly the same. Your money is exactly the same. The number of residential units is exactly the same. I have just distributed it in a form that makes sense. And this is the FSI numbers. You can see it right here. So here is the densest portion and the least dense portion right here. And these are all the numbers of every zone. This is a snapshot of the entire bylaw. This is technical, so you don't have to worry about it. This is all technical. You can see right here. Okay? It's okay. This is boring stuff. But here is the interesting part of it. Okay? Even this is actually not important. Now comes the various laws. What are the laws we write? The first law is the land use standard. Because planners still like to know what is permitted here, right? Which use is allowed here? They want to know. So what we say is, okay, let's get it out of the way. Big deal, not just, so here is the rule chart. So you have the various zones. These are the zones, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 5 colors are these colors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those 5 colors are right here, and it tells you which uses are allowed in which zone. And you can see that most uses are allowed in all zones with the exception of 1 or 2. What you're saying is basically, instead of restricting residential commercial, allow a mixing of uses so people don't have to drive to their work or drive to their shops. You can walk wherever you want. Okay? The second thing we do is for each zone, we write a series of bylaws. These are the bylaws for the zones. Now, what are these bylaws? So let's understand this. The first one is the biggest one, is when you have a large plot of land. This is the biggest problem in most of our cities. In Goa, this is a big problem now. Because if you take a large plot of land and you give it to a developer, what an architect will typically do for him is take one building and multiply the building 10 times on that site and pack the heck out of it. So what is the alternative? The alternative is you write a series of rules. And what we do typically is we make the rules graphic. Because graphics look nice. People enjoy them. It doesn't look boring. You don't need lawyers to read this. You can read it too. So we write the language, and then we say, look, if you have a plot of land, this rule, this law, mandates two things. The first one is that you have to break this parcel with at least one or two roads. The road can be private, we don't care. It doesn't have to be a public road. It can be a private road, totally fine. But it has to be a legitimate street. And there are standards for what that street has to be. It has to be a beautiful street, not a driveway. Then you have to introduce, in our case, service links. That we don't need that in India. Then you have to break it into parcels. And then you cannot design the same building more than 3 or 4 times. So in other words, we don't care about your FAR. We'll give you a maximum height cap. Now imagine me telling the same people, I am not going to limit you to 8 stories. I'm going to allow you to go 12 stories if you want in some cases. But here is the catch. If you want to go 12 stories in some cases, in other parts of your plot, you have to come down to 4 stories. So in other words, your average is still 8. Nobody is telling you not to put 8 stories. But instead of making every building 8 stories, you put 12 stories in one case and 4 stories in another. What we have realized is this has a lot more value in the real estate market, at least in our experience, even in India. Because some people want to live in 4-story buildings, some people want to live in 2-story buildings, paying a higher premium. Some people want to live that not a 4-day bungalow-like place, can live in the 9th floor of a apartment building. So what happens is, for a developer, it's more profit. You can now sell units in a more expensive way that are low-rise. You can sell expensive units that are less, that are more mid-rise and high-rise. If you follow this route, you don't have to go through the city council hearing. In US, it takes 6 months to go through planning commission, city council, get your entitlement and all that. So we say, just follow this route. And if you do it this way, you don't have to go through it because they've already approved this law. So you follow this law and you get entitled in 2 months and you go and build your project. A huge amount of savings. So these are the setbacks. So here are the rules. So here is a plot of land. What we're telling him is your building can be placed in this area in the densest part with no setback. Now, if you look, okay, so you can have no setback. You can see the amount of setback, front setback 0, 10-foot maximum. I can give you this, so you can study this. But this is the most important. Now, what we are telling him is in this zone is parking. This is a big one. What this slide tells you is this is the street. This is the street. The only place where you can put parking is in the back side of your plot. In other words, for the first half of the plot, you are not allowed to put any parking. Now that is a classic reversal of the law that has allowed the person to make a strip mall. Right? A strip mall basically puts parking in front, puts the building at the back, by law. Because there is nothing in the code that tells him you cannot put parking in the front. But this law reverses that. It says you cannot put parking in the front. You have to put the building in the front. The building face has to be the street face. We don't like it, sorry. But it is backed by our politicians. It is backed by our mayor. He wants this way. He's fed up with the way you guys are doing. And for each street, you write a law. Basically says, this is this type of street, this is this type of crossing, this is this type of paving, this is how the street. So when the time comes to improve the street, you have all these standards. Sidewalks like this, this, right there. It's simple. This should be done for Panjim actually. What is different in this versus the rules that Panjim has right now is the roads of Panjim are designed as if they're meant for cars. They don't talk about trees. They don't talk about sidewalks. They don't talk about street furniture. They're not part of design, right? They're just meant for engineering. They're just meant to take cars. But the moment you write things, tree species, planting, planter type, sidewalk with curb radius, parking, traffic lane, pavement, you are now basically saying, here is a law that balances cars, people, furniture, trees, everything. So you cannot just design the street for cars. By law, this street cannot be designed for cars alone. It has to be designed for everything. Next thing you put a law for is the open space act. Parks. What is a park? What is Azad Maidan? How would you define the rules that govern Azad Maidan for the next 20 years? I don't think this exists in Panjim right now. Imagine one of the most beautiful spaces in Panjim is the church square, Mary Immaculate Church Square. There is not a single rule. There's not a law that is written for Marine Drive. It's only written for buildings. So before you get into buildings, it's possible we could write laws for the open space. But streetscapes are becoming very important. There are a lot of beautiful projects in India now where urban designers are taking over streets. And that is wonderful. So this is something we should do for Panjim. Imagine taking Panjim and doing this to it. You identify all the streets, church square, this, that, simple. Identify what they are and create a strategy for them. But this is law. This is not some kind of street beautification. This is a law, right? This is legal. This is like blessed by the city. So whenever they have money, they already know what they're going to do. Church square will have palm trees. Something else will have this. Something else will have this. Something else will have this. The interesting thing is when the Portuguese were in Goa, this is exactly what they were doing. The reason Dayanad Banurkar Mark in Kampal is so beautiful is not an accident. That whole road at one point was an avenida. It was beautiful. It was designed with trees. It was not some kind of stupid accident. Oh, look how nice it looks. These guys had really designed it beautifully. So this we should do for Panjim. This is so easy. Any of you can do this. You just take it. You get your landscape architect. You get a civil engineer. You put it together, and you create a palette for all the main streets. You don't have to touch every single street, but the main streets you should do. This is simple, and then you write the law. You can have Gulmohar trees, you can have, Indian trees, you don't have to have Western trees. It's right there.
I was attending a webinar of MCHI, that is the organization of the developer here in Bombay or in, say, India, with Sadhguru last week only, whereby in the introduction only, Sadhguru told all the developers that you are doing a fine job, but you are constructing an oasis in your plot and you are not building a city. That is his points. And because of this, you are not making a name in the industry. If you think of the city, then definitely your industry can grow. But at the moment, you are thinking only about your plot and your development. No doubt that you are doing a fine job in your plot, but it is an oasis in the city.
It proves to you, city planning is eventually urban design, architecture. This is just pure logic. It's not rocket science. It's just simple common sense, right?
Bobby, I appreciate the idea of streetscapes you have introduced in the town planning as such. The fault in our town planning laws, I think that all are written by the engineers and not by the architects. And unfortunately, architects are not the part of the process which makes the laws here in Bombay. All engineers are there involved in making the laws here. Okay.
Yeah, but I think the answer to that is twofold. I think the best engineers I have met, if you put them among a bunch of architects, they'll feel like engineers. But if you make them sit among engineers, they call themselves architects. So what I'm trying to say is, I think this has to do a little bit with education as well, right? If we begin to educate our students in such a way that instead of calling yourself a super specialized architect, if you're a generalist, in the sense that you know enough about engineering, enough about architecture, and your expertise is architecture, but you know enough. That's one way. The second way is to find ways of extending your hand to the engineers. Instead of treating them like, I hate you, you guys are idiots, you don't know anything about architecture, I know everything, you guys are complete idiots. Nothing is going to happen. Instead of doing that, if we say, guys, that's fact, they know things we don't. So they know a lot of things we don't. So can we team up? Just let's figure it out. Let's figure it out. That's good. You take half the money, I'll take half the money, or whatever it is, or you take 2/3. I don't care. But what I'm trying to say is, The only way to be successful, I'm telling you from experience, is to have an attitude that is, how should I say, modest. I think that is a fundamental change in our profession, because most architects you meet are so full of themselves. They don't want to talk to anyone. They're the greatest things in the world. They wear black. They wear round glasses. I mean, you know the whole thing. But if you change that whole thing, I think at least we have been successful with this attitude in the world. Because it just, I don't know everything. And I mean it. Let's talk about it. What's the big deal, you know? So the last thing is building types. So after we have done all the streetscape and everything, we come to how do you translate building form in terms of the residential building typology. And this is a very difficult subject, but I'll just share it very quickly. Here are bylaws that show you how buildings can be configured on a site. Now, this has nothing to do with style. Nothing to do with style. Nobody is telling you to design a building with a straight line. Nobody. If you want to jog this back and put a curve here, you can do all of those things. Nobody's taking away your creativity. But fundamentally, there are only 3 or 4 ways of doing buildings. You can either put a forecourt towards the street, you can put a court behind, you can make an L building, you can make... So, in other words, the details of the building may change, your sculpturalism may change, but fundamentally, there are 3 or 4 ways of doing it. This is very important. Depending on the kind of building, we give a range of density. So here is your density. Note there is no FSI, but there is density. Density meaning, you know, if you take an average unit of 100 square meters, if you what is the average plot? What is the average apartment size in Goa right now? Like a 2-bedroom apartment. How big is it in Goa?
2-bedroom apartment would be anywhere between 85 to 100 square meters.
100. So say 100 square meters. So if you take an average of 100 square meters, you get a density number. So you basically say, assuming that an average unit is 100 square meters, these are density numbers. Now, why is this important? This means that if you have 1 acre of land, or whatever hectares you do in India, your maximum density can be 100 dwellings with an average of whatever. So instead of putting an FSI number, you put a density number, because it allows you to calculate the amount of infrastructure that you will need to support those kind of units. Then you have your areas, and it goes on and on. We can talk about the details. Then there is building and massing center. Now this is very important, because this is important because if you only give a maximum height, you get buildings that look like this, right? Or the colonies that we are talking about in Karanzane, right? I mean, because they have a maximum 8 stories, pack the heck out of it. You take 3 stories, 30-foot height, maximum. So what we have done is we have said, look, the way to design your building is your first floor could be 100%. You know, you can occupy the whole site. Your second floor can be 100%. Your third floor can be 70%. Your fourth floor can be 35%. So we write rules like that. So this is a building, for example. This is a project we did, but it was done with the same rules. And this is an FSI. Instead of treating this building like FSI, you treat this building with pure massing. And this is the project. It's a residential building. This could have been an apartment building, for example. This is an apartment building, but it's just designed in a way that's different, right? And you can see.
But there is a maximum number of stories you can go up to, Bobby?
In this case, the maximum height is 3 stories, but then we add an instrument called height averaging. Height averaging means that you can take 30% of your building or 40% of your building and go up to 5 stories, provided another 30% of your building comes down the same number, so that the average of your building is. That is a very, very interesting instrument. So every time you write a rule, don't write a single height. Never do this. This is a disaster. But if you say average 3, but you can go up to 5 in some cases, and you can come down to 2 in other cases, or 3 in other cases. Your average should be 5, but your height is still average 3, but you can go up to 5, provided you come down to 2. This is a huge a hugely successful instrument that has created buildings of various kinds that are much beautiful. Now, this is extremely important. The simplest thing, if you want to add one thing to the regulations in Pension, just one thing, I would add this. So these are called frontage standards. The frontage standard means you are in certain areas like Church Square or Azad Maidan. You are telling a building, we are not telling the whole city, we are just telling the special areas. The way your building face relates to the street, which we call frontage, has to be predictable. Because if we don't make it predictable, 10 architects are going to do whatever the hell they want and Azad Maidan is finished. The only reason Azad Maidan will be Azad Maidan if all the buildings talk to each other. We are not telling you the whole city should be like this. You can go to another area in the city and design a crazy building if you want, doesn't matter. But in places like Azad Maidan, in places like Church Square, because these are historic places of incredible importance, the buildings have to be a little bit quiet. There's a beautiful church. That church has to be the most important building, not you. So you have to behave. Now, how can I make you behave? I make you behave by not letting you do this nonsense, right? This is some architect who thinks that they are cool, and maybe they are. I don't know. But you put this building on Azad Maidan is finished. You put this building on Church Square, this Church Square is finished. I mean, you cannot do buildings like this. It's crazy. Maybe they're okay in other parts of the city. This building may be okay. Much more interesting for Church Square or Azad Maidan. I'm not saying it should be like this, but it is much more controlled, much more predictable. Because the idea is not to make your building cool, to make Azad Maidan cool. So let's keep all the buildings quiet. It could be done in various ways. I'm just showing you an example. There's a big difference in this versus this. Or there's a big difference in this versus this. You don't want this in Azad Maidan. You don't want this at Church Square. This is suburban. This is what you want in Church Square. You want sidewalks. You want, because this is the way it was. This is historic. So what do? We write a law that tells you what the faces of the buildings should be in these places, and we call them frontage standards. So you can do a porch, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, and they are shown here in 3D. They are shown in section, right? This is nothing special. I mean, you guys can do this. Imagine having a law written for Church Square that tells them that all the buildings along Church Square should be from here to there. You have to follow one of these. You have to either have a shop, you have to either have a court with some of the building coming to the property line, you have to have the building to the property line with an arcade, or you have to have a recessed arcade or something. I mean, imagine if all the buildings listened to you, you would have something very special. The style could be different. Some buildings could have, modern windows. Some buildings could be like containers. Some could be whatever. That's not the point. The point is we're all doing something in common. So in certain areas of Penji, absolutely imperative, I think, that we do this. Because otherwise, anything goes. That is going to destroy Penji, in my opinion. You should do your crazy architecture in other. And the last thing, and this is not something that I advocate very much, because I think style is the individual expression of an architect. We should have no say in that. Architecture is also an art, and it should be left to the architect to create his own aesthetic and all that. That is without question. But I want you to know that there are some cities that have hired me not only to write laws, but to change the aesthetic look of the city. Here's why. These cities were historic at one point. And because of all the nonsense that architects did, they felt that the economic value of the city was going down because the character of the city was being lost. So they forced us, against our wishes, to write laws that even regulated the style of architecture. This is not an easy thing to do. And I hate doing it, but I understand why you have to do it. So these are rules that study the traditional houses of these areas and write legal language that begins to extract the elements of what this means. And the last one is the signage stamp. You can do some very beautiful laws for buildings, but signage can destroy a city, as you have seen in India. I mean, you can just take over a beautiful place and it's gone. So all you have to do is, without being too strict, just allow a menu of signs and sizes and types, just like you do for an interior, basically, that allow you to take it home. And the last thing, which is the most important, is how do you apply this code? So what we do when we are hired to create a process like this is, we also rewrite the process through which your entitlement will happen. And there were many of you that made these comments before. For example, last time I was in Panjim last year when Siddha called me down, one of the things we were talking about in Madgaon is how do you require drawings of a certain kind for your submission process? Right now, architects submit a plan, some elevation section for their plot, and they get approved. Imagine if you are required to show the buildings right next to you as part of your submission. Imagine if in special areas in the city, historic areas in the city, there's a panel, and that panel will judge your project based on what is going on. Now, I understand in Goa that doesn't work, but we should try this, right? I mean, you raise the standards of how architects submit their process, their project. In other words, can you show the street facade? Can you show what's happening on both sides of your plot? Can you show how it will fit in? All these things are available to us, right? I mean, there is no difference between the softwares that I work in and softwares that you work in. You have the same, in fact, more, if anything. You guys are 10 times more sophisticated in terms of softwares you use than some of us. So there's nothing like saying, oh, we don't have that technology. You have the same technology we do. So why are we lowering the standards of how we want architects to present it? So the bottom line is, I mean, this is what we tell our clients. If you have a large piece of land, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do that, and then you show us. So this is the submission requirement. If you have a large plot of land, it is mandatory that you show us graphics that explain the strategy of how you've broken it, how you've parcelized it, how many parcels you have, how you've divided it into buildings that are not repetitive. Show us some color drawings about the site plan, show us how it fits within the city. And then the last slide is, this project that you see is a project done on these kind of rules. This is our project, we did this. But it was done through rules in a historic district that were written by somebody else, very similar to what I have shown you. The only point I'm making is, these rules do not have to limit you from doing architecture. This is a simple building in a historic district, right? You can see it's right here, this building. And there's a building here, and there's a building here. But the rules that tell you to bring the building to the street, to allow you to step back, can create simple architecture that can be of a completely different style. I mean, this can be traditional. You may do it modern. Somebody else may do it whatever. It doesn't matter. But the buildings are making a street. They're making a city. And that's what it's about. So the bottom line is, this is entirely possible to do in Panjim, to do in Goa. The only thing we need is real political clout to back it. Because we can continue to talk here for another hour if you want, but if we don't have the political connections to make sure the people in power really understand this, there's absolutely no use. So I think this is the main point that I would like you guys to talk about. How do we make this happen in a city like Panjim, where I still think we have a chance to do something like this, which everybody can look at around us and say, wow, Panjim really did something absolutely amazing.
Bobby, I have one slight questions about the town planning aspects of your scheme as such.
Sure.
By giving the difference in heights, you have economically changed the value of two adjacent plots, nearby plots, I will say.
Yes.
So how can this be adjusted? Every client will have his view about his value of his plots, because here in Bombay, what the authority has solve this problem by giving one FSI to all the plots. That is the initial FSI, and that's the value of your plots. Then, depending upon the width of the street, you can hire the FSI, that we call it as a TDR, and
Right.
so if your plot is abutting to the 6-meter wide road, you have one FSI, that is your butt right, that you can construct in whatever manner you can have. But if your plot is abutting to the 24-meter width wide road, then you can hire a FSI, which is a TDR, from the open market, and then you can construct. But here, this sort of aspects I have not seen in your scheme. You have restricted the height, and by restricting the height, you are restricting the FSI of that plot. So how economically you will satisfy the owner of that plot by restricting the height is my question.
Yeah, I understand. This is a very good question. So there are two answers to this question. The first one is the height limit of any building in any zone is not done as in a vacuum. In other words, say tomorrow, we decide that a certain area of Mumbai has to be increased in FSI. Okay, say tomorrow we has a project and the government says, okay, Vinayak, we want you to help us create a rule we want to increase the FSI from here to 8, from 4 to 8, because we are widening the road or something like that. Now, if I am saying, government of Mumbai, don't bring in FSI, so they'll say, okay, what are you going to do then? So what we will say is, we'll gather in the room, we'll have planners, architects, you, me, whatever, we'll calculate the FSI. We'll calculate exactly what FSI is required, so 8 or whatever. But the law will not be written in the language of FSI. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, Chandan, is the height limit that we give. So when I say the height limit of a building is 12 stories, and you can go up to 16, you can go up to 20, provided you come down. That 12-story average is not an ordinary number that I'm creating out of my mind. It is created after a careful study of the economics of real estate, the infrastructure that is available, the transportation study of the area. Everything that is desired by the government in terms of the FSI is taken into account. The only thing we don't do is we don't write it in a language of FSI. So what I'm trying to say is, we don't deny the desire of the market for higher FSI. We don't think that limiting FSI is a very good idea, because if you try and limit FSI, no, the developer lobby is going to be against you. They will never go for these kinds of things. The only way is to increase FSI, but not increase it in a haphazard way. So increase FSI in certain areas of the city, but don't allow random FSI increases. So the only danger I see in Goa when they write the regional plans, I don't know about Mumbai, but I've seen in Goa, what they're doing is they're taking a certain area and they're trying to increase its FSI. That's a problem, because you have not looked at where it is in the city, what it means, why you're increasing the FSI, what streets are in front of it. So if you begin to look at the whole of Panjim and then say, okay, here is the outskirts of Panjim, Karanzale. Now let's increase the FSI of Karanzale, totally fine. But we are going to increase it in this area, then this area is going to be low, this area, that's totally fine. So it is the random, isolated FSI that we are questioning. The second part of your question is, how do you reconcile adjacency?
Yes.
Right, so if I have 2 plots of land, and one plot faces a narrow road and one plot faces a wide road, your criticism is that the wide road gets more bonus.
Yeah.
Because it just happens to face
Yes.
but the TDR that you're talking about is transfer development right. Am I right? T stands for transfer. In the US, when you transfer FSI, transfer meaning, I'll give you an example, especially for all of you. Okay, we have done this on an experimental basis. So about 6 years ago, I was doing a project in Varanasi, Banaras. And, the Ghats are there, right? Banaras, the Ghats. Now, what you don't know is, although the Ghats are so beautiful, the FSI on the Ghats is very high. If you look at the zoning of Varanasi, the FSI is like 3 or something, crazy. Like they will never build like that. But you're allowed to go much taller. Nobody is going to build like that because half of the buildings are historic. So what we propose there is a TDR scheme based on Mumbai, where the extra FSI that is there, say 2 floors, 3 floors, you are allowed to sell that FSI to the outskirts of the city. So the point I'm making, Chandan, is TDR is always purchased. You spend money. I don't know what happens in Mumbai, but in US, when you're doing a TDR, the developer buys the FSI from somebody else. Either buys it from the government or buys it from another developer. We call it air rights. So in other words, it is not given to you for free. It is never given to you for free. It is a privilege that is given to you because your plot faces a particular kind of street or plaza, but it is not mandatory. You are not mandated to do it.
Absolutely.
You are allowed to do it, but you are allowed to do it at your own expense. And what is to stop you? I mean, for example, if you want to shell out money and build more and build it per the rules, why should we stop you? That's totally fine. But the rules are very strict because the rules say that you have to step back and you have to do this and you have to do that. So what we're trying to say is these laws have to be enabling. They have to be friendly to developers. We have to make developers our friends. If we don't make developers our friends, nothing is going to happen. So, just allow them to make money. They want to make money. Allow them to make money, but make money in a way that makes our cities. I think that is the moral of the story. You have to let them make money.
Yes.
Absolutely. Otherwise we are being ideologues. That doesn't make any sense. Nothing is like that.